This is part two of evolution and natural selection. All right, so we had just finished up in part one talking about the different animals that Darwin studied. Again, some very fascinating animals with differences that made Darwin really think about how different organisms had changed over time. So, on his journey home, Darwin looked over everything he had written down. He had observed that characteristics of many plants and animals varied greatly from one island to the next. All of this information really made him think about hypothesis. And his hypothesis, was that maybe separate species have arisen from one common original ancestor. Basically, he thought that through natural selection that animals had changed over time. So, to tell you about natural selection, which was a big part of Darwin's theory, I want to first compare or tell you about artificial selection. Now, you are going to write down this slide to let you know species naturally vary from individual to individual. So there is a natural variation from one animal to the next of the same species. Humans have really capitalized on this idea, and we do something called artificial selection. So these natural variations that we say or that we talked about here, nature provides variations between different organisms. We as humans select variations that we want in different animals and things that we find useful. So think about all the different dogs that you've ever seen. Humans have artificially selected different traits that they want their dogs to have. Once we select for a trait, we artificially induce fertilization and production of a new baby that is going to have the traits that we're looking for. This is called artificial selection. By the way, there are over 400 different types of dogs, and their original ancestor was the wolf. So there has been lots of selection that's taken place to make our 400 different types of dogs. So, natural selection, on the other hand, is the process by which individuals that are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce than other members of the same species. So it's basically the same idea. The animals are varied from one to the next. Animals that have adaptations that are beneficial and help them to live in the environment that they live in are more likely to survive and pass their information or their genes on to the next generation than those animals that don't have good adaptations for their environment. Natural selection would weed out those with poor att- uh, attributes and keep the ones that have adaptations that are the best for that environment. Go ahead and write this slide as well. This slide will be written too. On the left-hand side, write evolution by natural selection, and right-hand side, the struggle for existence. So basically, members of each species of animal have to compete for the resources, for food, shelter, other life necessities. Basically, it's an idea of survival of the fittest. Some of those animals are better suited for the environment, are better suited to get the food, the shelter, the other life necessities, and they're the ones who are going to live to pass on their genes to the next generation. Those that cannot compete die and are not able to pass on their genes to the next generation. The struggle for existence and survival of the fittest is what drives evolution. Whether it drives to the most sleek body type that can swim fast underwater but also be above the water as well and be just as successful, or the cranes who are able to look from high above in the water and get fish out of the water. These are both birds, and they have been selected for through natural selection, and they are the most fit for their environments. So, over time, natural selection results in changes in inherited characteristics of a population. These changes increase a species' fitness in its environment. Write this. This will be on the right-hand side. This is an example of a winning organism. This organism, the shark, is the most fit for its environment and is at the top of its food chain. Evolution and natural selection has led to this effective killing machine. Environmental pressures do affect evolution as well. Natural and artificial conditions can affect the health or life of an organism. Things such as food shortages, deforestation, overpopulation. All of these things add additional pressures to the environment, and those organisms that are the most fit are the ones that survive and pass their genes on to the next generation. These lead to adaptations. Adaptations are any alteration in the structure or function of an organism that allows it to survive and become better fit to survive and multiply in its environment. Adaptations are those things that help organisms to be successful in different environments. Go ahead and write this slide down. Write adaptations on the left, the rest of it on the right. Mutations also help or are part of the equation with evolution. A mutation is a change that occurs when a DNA gene is damaged or changed in such a way as to alter the genetic message carried by that gene. These mutations can cause physical changes that can either help or harm the organism. These mutations can be helpful and they can become an adaptation, or they can be harmful and they can not allow that organism to survive and pass their genes on to the next generation. Go ahead and write this information down as well. Write mutation on the left and the definition on the right. So it all comes down to the idea of descent. Descent with modification. Each living organism has descended with changes from other species over time. There is also the idea of common descent, that we are all derived from common ancestors, going back to the primordial soup, that organism that first was considered life, that crawled out of the primordial soup. We are all related to that organism, and we have descended with modifications to the huge number of species that we have today. You just need to look at a series of pictures of humanoid life forms over the years to see how we have changed over time and modified from our earlier ancestors up to present day. Descent with modification. Next time we talk, we will discuss the evidence that science has for evolution. That includes the fossil record, geographic distribution of living things, homologous body structures, and similarities in early development. We will discuss these at a later time. Great job. That's it for this.